Around 1905, Lottie Ki Yated, daughter of a Laguna Pueblo chief, posed for a photograph. The Kawaii attire with beaded belt and necklaces signals the ceremonial role. The scene takes place in the semi-arid west-central region of New Mexico, on the outskirts of Albuquerque, as the railroads were beginning to connect regions, goods, and ways of life. In 1908, a photo attributed to Roland Reed records an Ojibwa woman. At the turn of the century, her people inhabited the Great Lakes region, moving with the rhythm of the seasons, fishing, gathering, and crafts in birch bark and beadwork. The image suggests continuity of knowledge and, at the same time, an encounter with photographic modernity. Subscribe and tell us where you're joining us from. In 1900, Carl Wernz photographs in Arizona two young Hopi by a window. The hair whirls signal youth and roles in the community. At the turn of the century, the villages atop the mesas of the Colorado Plateau received artists, traders, and travelers. Their gazes already follow this approaching world, bringing promises and tensions. In 1878, a photograph at Fort Keogh in the Montana Territory shows a Cheyenne woman. The military post, erected after Little Bighorn under Nelson Miles's campaign, consolidated the army on the plains. In that environment, the Cheyenne, an Algonquian-speaking people and allies of the Lakota and Arapaho, experienced displacement and struggled to preserve their rights and memory. In the image, Carlotta Chiwiwi appears with her daughters, Maria and Felicita Tura, members of Isleta Pueblo. The record from the early 20th century and attributed to Poli is set in the U.S. Southwest, when New Mexico was moving from territory to statehood in 1912. The composition reinforces kinship ties and the centrality of women in Taiwa life. At First Mesa, Arizona, Frederick Monson recorded in the first decades of the 20th century, young Hopi from Sikomovi. The girls wear ritual attire tied to the rhythm of harvests and village festivals. Amid a Southwest in transformation, the photograph reveals practices that hold firm and weave cultural continuity. Between past and future, the portrait brings us closer. A scene from 1895 portrays a young woman of Taos Pueblo, in present-day New Mexico. Among adobe walls, marks of daily labor dialogue with the memory of the place, inhabited for centuries by Taiwa speakers. On the upper Rio Grande, the Pueblo was a crossroads of exchange before colonization. The multi-story dwellings reveal the communal logic of its architecture. In 1892, the photograph records a young Kiowa in an everyday scene, integrated with her people. The garments, made with beads and textiles already common in that period, signal exchanges with settlers and the plains trade networks. The attentive gaze and the adornments suggest the responsibilities of youth and rights that sustained Kiowa life at the end of the 19th century. A Woman of the Spokane Nation, recorded in 1897 by Frank LaRoche, faces the camera. The clothing and adornments point to practices of the Columbia Plateau. The scene belongs to a time of turning in the Pacific Northwest. Railroads were advancing and new economies taking hold, while collective life preserved rituals, beadwork, and basketry. In 1904, in present-day New Mexico, a photograph records the Corn Maiden, a mythical figure of the Pueblo peoples. At the turn of the 20th century, the scene reveals corn as the axis of daily life, sustenance at the table, ruler of the agricultural calendar, and offering in rituals. By bringing myth, labor, and community together, the image shows how the Southwest wove meaning around this grain. In 1900, Carl Everton Moon traveled through indigenous territories in the United States to record, with the camera, a world in transformation. His project documented daily practices, rituals, landscapes, and elders' accounts, seeking to keep memory at the turn of the 20th century, when Western expansion and new frontiers were redrawing these communities' lives. In the 1880s, in the territory of New Mexico, a woman of the Taos Pueblo people faces the camera. The record shows dark wool on the body, a mantle thrown over the shoulders, turquoise necklaces, and a hairstyle proper to tradition. In the background, the adobe houses point to communal life. On the face, the everyday guided by rituals, exchanges, and the rhythm of the harvests. In the 1880s, Marcia Pascal, of Cherokee descent and daughter of U.S. Army officer George Pascal, travels a country in transformation. In the wake of the Civil War, the march westward, the railroads and the redefinition of laws reshaped the Indian Territory and mixed communities, shaping her choices and the reach of her voice. In 1894, a Kiowa woman lives in the former Indian Territory, today Oklahoma. After the Plains Wars and the creation of borders, her people were undergoing changes that affected the economy and the sacred. Ceremonies hesitated, the language contracted, family roles shifted. What once rested on regional alliances now had to seek a new balance. United States, 1900. A young indigenous woman appears in ceremonial attire of her nation. On the threshold of the 20th century, Native peoples face losses of territory and changes in autonomy. In this setting, dress speaks loudly. Each garment and adornment reaffirms belonging and continuity, a gesture of resistance that crosses time and confronts modernization. In 1899, the photographer Frank Reinhardt recorded Hattie Tom, an Apache woman. The image appears at the end of the 19th century, when the American West was reorganizing and Native peoples were negotiating new civil powers. In the framing, adornments, and posture, one sees a conscious gesture to assert one's own origin and choose how to appear to the world amid tensions and continuities. Elsie Vance Chestuan, of the Chiricahua branch, enters the Apache history of the Southwest at the end of the 19th century. Amid campaigns and forced marches, the clans maintained kinship ties, alliances, and paths of subsistence. Her name summons memories of imprisonments, removals, and tense coexistence with army posts on the Mexico-United States border. In 1886, Lizzie Longwolf appears in the arena of Buffalo Bill's show. The Wild West tours where she performs helped fix in the imagination the idea of the frontier. On stage, rides, trick shooting, and choreographed numbers combine to transform scattered episodes into a narrative of the West, ready to sell. In 1895, a photograph records a young Hopi, a Pueblo people of the mesas of Arizona. Her clothing and adornments reveal family and stage of life. While the end of the 19th century brought railroads, merchants, and researchers, the community's calendar remained paced by seasonal ceremonies that sustained bonds and meanings in collective daily life. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt records Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman. In the ethnographic climate of the century's end, the image invites us to notice adornments, hairstyle, and textiles that reveal the group's techniques and identities. The serenity of the portrait echoes memories of displacement and alliances sealed after the Apache Wars, between memory and survival. In 1886, the photograph portrays Isabel Perico Njadi, a Chiricahua Apache woman held as a prisoner of war. The frame signals the end of the campaigns in the U.S. Southwest. After Geronimo's surrender, the capture of Apache groups intensified. Her presence reveals the impacts of military advance and occupation on indigenous peoples. Around 1900, the photograph records Alice, possibly linked to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla, peoples of the Columbia Plateau. Her features, clothing, and adornments indicate cultural belonging. The context of the time brought treaties, forced displacements, and new borders in the Pacific Northwest, shaping destinies and memories that the image still evokes. In 1885, the photograph portrays a young Comanche woman. The hairstyle, beads, and fabric reveal artisanal knowledge and commercial exchanges in the southern Great Plains. It is a time after the collapse of the bison and the imposition of fixed territories, changes that redirected movements, dress, and forms of sustenance for the people. The scene condenses a historical turning point. In 1900, a photograph records a young Hopi woman on her wedding day. The frame reveals rituals that brought families and clans together in the villages of the Arizona Plateau. Textiles and shell and turquoise ornaments speak of crafts passed down. The hairstyle and the pieces offered announce entry into adult life and uphold the continuity of the people. In the 1886 photograph, Julie Nelson appears aligned with the social codes of the late 19th century. Attire, hairstyle, and posture communicate the pursuit of respectability amid urbanization and industrial advance. The direct gaze and calculated pose suggest control and self-awareness before the camera, a mirror of new forms of visibility and transformation and of status. In 1895, George A. Addison paints Amy and Carrie Kiowa. On the namesake island off South Carolina, two figures occupy the scene. In the post-Reconstruction era, when the barrier islands combined fishing and cotton, clothing, postures, and objects reveal routines guided by tides and coastal exchanges, in a record that brings matter, labor, and landscape closer. In the 1880s, it was the young Comanche women who kept life in motion. They prepared food, set up and moved camps, worked leather, and brokered exchanges, sustaining mobile networks tied to buffalo hunting and trade. By teaching languages, songs, and rituals, they wove kinship and alliances, preserving traditions in a time of change on the plains.